thriller, doesn't it?
Well, what's fascinating here is this whole line of thought actually started with one of our listeners. They were watching a YouTube documentary.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, with a pretty memorable title, Papal Prophecy in the End Times. Are we nearing the final chapter? Ninjas are butterflies.
Huh. Ninjas or butterflies? Okay.
It's from a channel called Sunday Cool, and watching that, it just sparked this real curiosity about this whole prophecy of the popes.
Absolutely. So, right, this deep dive takes us into this really intriguing prophecy. It's attributed to Saint Malachy of Armagh.
Irish figure, 1100s.
Exactly. And the documentary mentioned he's sometimes called the first Catholic in Ireland, which kind of makes you pause and think about the history there.
It does. It really does. So the core of it, according to this YouTube video, which, references other documentary sources too, is that Saint Malachy, he supposedly wrote down 111 short.
Cryptic, right?
Very cryptic Latin phrases, yeah. And the claim is that these phrases predict every single pope, starting way back with Celestine II in 1143.
Wow, 1143.
And going chronologically right up to, our current Pope, Francis.
But here's where it gets really interesting and honestly takes a decidedly ominous turn. The documentary points out that after the phrase linked to Pope Francis, the prophecy just stops giving descriptions for successors.
It just ends.
Not quite.
Yeah.
Instead, it chillingly predicts the end of the papacy, followed by the destruction of Rome and then...
Oh, boy.
Yeah, wait for it. Judgment Day.
Judgment Day. Talk about a dramatic finale. So this raises a big question, right? What is this prophecy exactly?
It's a good question.
Like the YouTube host discussed, it's not just a list of names. It's, each pope supposedly gets linked to one of these brief, kind of enigmatic descriptions in order.
Right, like characteristics.
Yeah.
And the Sunday Cool team, they highlighted this really striking visual aspect too. It's connected to the Basilica of St. Paul, outside the walls, in Rome.
Ah, the portraits. Yes.
Exactly. Apparently, inside this basilica, there's this series of portraits. It shows every pope, stretching all the way from Peter.
Right back to the beginning.
All the way to Francis. They line the interior.
And what's compelling, or maybe even a bit unsettling, is what the documentary claims about the space there.
The empty markers.
Yeah. The assertion is that there's a finite number of these spots for papal portraits. And the claim is, after Pope Francis, there's supposedly only one empty marker left.
Just one.
Just one. Yeah. So the implication, obviously, is that this, physical limitation mirrors the prophetic end, the end of the line, as foreseen by Malachy.
It definitely adds a tangible, almost visual weight to the whole idea. Now, it's probably no surprise that prophecy this, big, hasn't gone unchallenged over the centuries.
Oh, absolutely not.
The documentary touches on that. Apparently, history records some popes just dismissing it outright. While others, they seem to have viewed it with a degree of seriousness.
Which really speaks to that complex interplay, between faith and tradition and how prophecy is interpreted within the church.
Right.
And the YouTube video raised another thought-provoking point about influence.
How so?
Well, given that cardinals are the ones who elect the popes, could the prophecy itself, just its existence, whether it's real or not, could it have subtly guided their choices?
You mean like nudge them towards candidates who seem to fit the next cryptic phrase?
Exactly. Maybe consciously, maybe unconsciously. It introduces this idea of a prophecy potentially shaping its own fulfillment,
It's like a historical Rorschach test, isn't it? People seeing what they expect or maybe want to see.
That's a good way to put it.
The documentary also put quite a bit of emphasis on Pope Benedict XVI's decision, his resignation.
Yes. Pope Benedict XVI resigning in 2013. That was huge. I mean, the first time a pope had stepped down in, centuries?
Yeah, a really long time.
And the Sunday Cool hosts, they rightly pointed out that the prophecy structure kind of suggests Francis would be the last one after Benedict.
Right.
So Benedict's decision, which he said was due to health, feeling unable to lead effectively, it fits neatly into that narrative. It sort of paves the way for the one the prophecy implies is the final pope.
And then they got into this really specific kind of intricate calculation, something about interpretations of the prophecy, this middle of the sign idea.
Yes, the middle of the sign. Yeah. What's particularly interesting there is the interpretation suggesting a halfway point within the whole sequence.
Okay.
So the documentary explains that the time between Celestine II, the first pope in the prophecy back in 1143, and the pope identified as this middle pope in 1585, that span is 422 years.
422 years, got it.
And following that logic, the prediction is pretty striking. Another 422 years from that 1585 marker would signify the end.
Okay, hold on. 1585 plus 422.
Gets you to 2027.
2027. Wow. Suddenly this centuries-old thing feels, well, not so distant and abstract anymore.
Exactly. But the timeline talk didn't actually stop there, did it?
Yeah.
The Sunday Cool Guys brought up some other intriguing prophetic viewpoints, too.
They did. They mentioned Pope John the 23rd.
Right. Who apparently claimed prophetic abilities himself.
And he's said to have predicted the end of the world occurring 2,000 years after the life of Christ.
And traditionally, Christ's life is considered, 33 years long?
Yeah, 33 years. But then Pope Benedict VI, through his theological work, he offered a different take on Jesus' birth year.
He did. He suggested Jesus was actually born maybe 6 years earlier than the conventional year 0.
Okay. So 6 BC.
That's the idea. And this seemingly small adjustment in dating, well, it has a pretty noticeable effect on that timeline.
How so?
Well, if Jesus was born in 6 BC, then adding 2,000 years gets you to 1994. Then, if you add the traditional 33 years for his life...
That shifts the potential end date to 2027 again.
Precisely. A rather uncanny alignment with the timeline from the Malachy prophecies' middle of the sign interpretation.
It's definitely convergence of timelines that the documentary found pretty significant. They also touched upon the possibility that the prophecy of the popes might have a different author entirely.
Oh, right, the Nostradamus theory.
Yeah, the idea that maybe the famous French seer, Nostradamus, who was also Roman Catholic and known for his cryptic prophecies, maybe he was the real author, not St. Malachy.
Which just adds another layer of mystery, doesn't it? And historical debate around where this thing even came from and if it's authentic.
It really makes you think about the historical backdrop for all these prophecies. The documentary also briefly touched upon the origins of the papacy itself, just for context.
Yeah, understanding that development is pretty essential context, I think.
Okay.
The traditional view is Peter as the first pope, right? And the papacy evolving from the Roman Church of Christians after Rome became Christian. There's also that perspective mentioned in the YouTube video that the Roman Empire sort of transformed into the church, highlighting Rome's enduring influence.
Right, the continuity. And as if all this wasn't enough to chew on, the Sunday Cool hosts couldn't resist looking at, well, current global events through this 2027 lens.
Yes, and it's important we're really clear here.
Okay.
The documentary hosts were simply drawing parallels between things happening now, like, the constant threat of World War III, or the recent appearance of red heifers.
Which have significance in some end times beliefs, yeah.
Right, and the ongoing talk about the Ark of the Covenant. They were connecting those kinds of current events to this predicted 2027 timeframe.
So just recounting their observations.
Exactly. This was a recounting of their observations and connections as presented in their video. It's not us analyzing or endorsing those links. We're just reporting on the content we looked at.
Understood. Okay. So to try and bring it all together then,
Yeah.
we've done this deep dive into the prophecy of the popes, this collection of cryptic phrases supposedly mapping out every pope right up to Francis. And we've looked at that rather unsettling claim that he's the last one before the end of the papacy, and maybe much more.
We've also examined that compelling image of the Basilica's limited papal markers.
Right.
The significant timing of Benedict VI Sigurot's resignation fitting into the prophecy structure, and that intriguing 2027 timeline that seems to pop up from multiple interpretations.
Yeah, both the middle of the sign thing and
Yeah.
the revised calculations based on Benedict's view of Jesus' birth year.
Exactly. And finally, we touched on those alternative theories about who even wrote it and how the documentary hosts were looking at current events within that time frame.
So here's maybe a final thought for you listening in. Considering how prophecies like this just persist throughout history and our human tendency, to look for meaning and patterns.
We do love patterns.
We do. So what is the ongoing discussion, the fascination even, with this particular prophecy? What does it really tell us about our own anxieties today? And maybe the hopes we hold for the future, regardless of whether the prophecy itself is actually valid or not?
That's a great question. Something to definitely keep pondering.